Welcome to 30-Minute Reviews. I am Adam, and a very special episode today. We're going to be doing it for each of the 5 parts. I'm not going to split up parts 2 and then the Black Lightning tie-in into separate episodes. I'm going to do it, one episode for both. Only because I don't think that's really... Black Lightning is more of a tie-in than it is a full part. It's not part 3. It's Earth Crisis, which is its own episode of its own show. So putting it into its own episode would be kind of weird, especially considering I'm not caught up on Black Lightning. I'm talking about Crisis on Infinite Earths. This is as the title would suggest. Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 1 aired last night. I've now watched it twice. I watched it last night. After it aired, I DVR'd it. I watched it again today, and it's something. There's a lot of things that kind of happen here that I wasn't expecting to happen in part 1. I was expecting it to go on later. I've even said that when I discussed in the trailer that dropped in the last episode that I talked about it. I said I think that Earth 38 is going to be destroyed by the end of the first at the end of the first half, at the midway point. But we're gonna dive in a little bit and talk about some of the cool things. Now let's start out with that opening with the narration from the monitor. And there's going to be spoilers abound in this, so just be aware of that. I now say after disclosing that Earth 38 does meet its end at the end of this episode. But there are spoilers, so if you have not yet seen Part 1, don't listen to this until after you've seen Part 1. So let's talk about some of the things that happened when the episode opened. We jump in with kind of a history of the multiverse, how the multiverse started, and all of that. And then we see destruction somewhere else. We see Earth 89 get destroyed, which is the home of Tim Burton's Batman. We see Robert Wall's character from Batman reading a newspaper where we find out that the Joker is still active in Gotham now 30 years later. He's still active in Gotham, Jack Nicholson's Joker. We also find out, and then, that Earth's destroyed. We go to Earth 9, which was speculated to be the Titans world from various things that were talked about. That's also destroyed. We see Hawk and Jason Todd witness the antimatter wave as it destroys their world. We see Earth X get destroyed from Crisis on Earth X. We see the Ray take it. And then we see we finally go to Earth 66, which is the world of Batman 66. That one also dies. We see Burt Ward. He has his holy crimson skies of death, which is such a great line that kind of if you don't know, Burt Ward doesn't quite look like he did back in what's it called? He was young back in 1966. He's older now. So that's a good way of telling who he is. When you get to Earth 89, you can kind of tell what it is. Because you can that it's got the gothic look for Gotham. That kind of has become the set. The set look of Gotham became kind of like what Burton illustrated it as back in 1989. And because of that, you can kind of tell what it is when you look at it. This one, the city looks kind of like Central City, or National City, so they kind of have to show you what Earth that is and why it's being destroyed, and all of that. Now, 2 quick thoughts about that. Number 1, it was previously speculated earlier this week that the Green Lantern show on HBO Max could be in the Arrowverse. On top of that, Stargirl, which is allegedly getting launched out of Crisis on Infinite Earths, is airing on the CW the day after it comes out on the DC Universe app. So I think that'd be a Saturday night show, which would presumably make it part of the Arrowverse. So having this now be there creates this weird, interesting situation where we can now pull in the Titans onto the same Earth as Flash and what will be Green Arrow and the Canaries, and presumably Supergirl in the wake of this episode and all of that. So it's interesting. So we've already got a lot of major things happening. We got Jason Todd dead and not at the hands of a crowbar. We got what's it called? We have Hawk's dead. We have Batman 89. We have Batman 66. We have Robin. We have two dead Robins now. That are explicitly seen right out of the gate. Kind of ups the stakes a little bit, because it's like, in the same way, I'm going to be using a lot of Infinity War comparisons, because of the going into this, it's a 5-part crossover, half and then 3 parts and then 2 parts after a break in January. I presume that they're going to use kind of Infinity War's cliffhanger going into Endgame as a as kind of a similar situation, where they're going to be at their lowest point at the end of Part 3 tomorrow night. I'm recording this on Monday. Last night, Sunday, Part 1 aired, Part 2 airs tonight, Part 3 airs tomorrow. So that's what I'm presuming is going to happen. And they're going to come back from the break, they're going to defeat the Anti-Monitor, and then everyone moves on with their shows and this new status quo they got to deal with. So the situation that where was I going with that? Right after I was. DC Universe shows folded into the Arrowverse. As long as they maintain the quality and what they are, it's like they can still cross over, and it's not that big a deal in the future. And they can just not acknowledge each other. Worst case scenario. Now the show actually addresses one other issue that I had that would have been that I think really continuing the Infinity War comparison. That's where I was, the Infinity War comparison. The heroes are divided. And it's not so much because of Civil War like it was in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's not because they fought and they don't get along anymore and they gotta come back together in the wake of this in this horrible, situation. They gotta wow, they have to kind of come together and, put aside their differences and come and figure it out. It's more this situation of the heroes are separated because, I guess to an extent, the Monitor thought that things could be contained, and he thought the things that, what his team he was able to do, what needed to be done. Anti-Monitor to be handled pretty early, problem solved. Unfortunately, he was wrong, and now things go differently. It's kind of it's kind of interesting, because going into Crisis, I feel like had the teams communicated with each other, it would have created a different set of circumstances. Like, had they warned Kara that there was this cataclysm coming, the team on the team on Earth 38 could have been more prepared. If Barry and Oliver talked prior to this, it may have helped too. Now, that's something else that they actually address in this episode when Barry goes to Oliver and he's like, "Look, Oliver, I got some bad news for you. I have to sacrifice myself." And then Oliver's like, "Wait, time out," and he calls for the Monitor. And he's like, "I thought I was sacrificing myself," and he is now too. And it's like, look, everyone's sacrificing themselves, everyone's dying. So just be prepared. I think it was an interesting thing to have that conversation early on in the event, because it was something that, had they had this conversation earlier, they could have kind of worked something out a little bit better. Probably tried to come to terms more with what's happening and figured out what's going on. One other thing I want to address is I hope that they figure out and talk about why a bullet in Nash Wells' head when he was introduced wouldn't have just stopped the crisis right there. Because if he freed the Anti-Monitor, wouldn't killing him when he first, wouldn't Like, they know that Crisis is coming. Crisis is known to be coming, and the Monitor knows that this is impending. So why wouldn't they just kill the person who's going to unleash the Anti-Monitor before he can do it? It's not like in the comic, it's, the scientist is doing it, and then he accidentally unleashes the Anti-Monitor, and now he's forced to bear witness to what he does. And that was something else, is at the end when they introduced Pariah. One of the things I noticed is that Pariah's dialogue is very annoying in the comics. So it's very lofty language, and it's very, it's very melodramatic. It works a lot better in live action, and with a good actor behind it. Tom Cavanaugh's a fantastic actor, and having him play Pariah was a great decision. But besides that, the way he delivers the lines, the lines sound verbatim from the comic. It works a lot better in this respect than it did in the comic. There was something else I wanted to talk about. The CGI didn't look great, but again, it's a network TV Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover. It seems that they put a lot of money into dealing with the dealing with special appearances and costuming and things like that. The other thing that I like about this crossover that Elseworlds kind of got away from was continuing to build what's happening in the respective shows while the crossover is still happening. And that's an important thing that they don't really do in Elseworlds. And it's, if I'm watching, let's say I'm an Arrow viewer and I'm watching Elseworlds, so I'm going to watch Flash, Arrow, Supergirl. I'm going to watch all three shows because, it continues the story of Arrow. Elseworlds didn't give me a reason to watch The Flash or Supergirl. It didn't really, tell me what the plot was. Though the dialogue was a little clunky, we get a scene where Alex goes and meets with Lena. And it kind of sums up the entire first half of season 5 until this point, where it's like Lena did something bad, she felt betrayed, she tried to pawn it off on Eve Tessmacher. That didn't work, and now she's going to work with the team again. But it kind of sums up everything that happened, and they kind of do that in a very quick way. So I think that was something else that really benefits when you're doing a crossover like this. At the end of the day, the crossover is going to have more viewers than anything else. If not, especially when you're doing Crisis on Infinite Earths. It's probably one of the most well-known event comics in history of event comics. It was the origin of the Maxi event was Crisis on Infinite Earths. So it's interesting to see that they're actually doing that this time and using it in a more conventional television sense where, if we're going to do a crossover, we want to try and boost viewership for these other shows while we do it. And again, I feel like part of the problem why the plan that they had didn't quite... one other thing from early on that I wanted to address. They didn't need to retread Oliver and Mia on Lian Yu, because it doesn't really add anything to the story, and if they just jumped to Oliver and Mia being in Earth 38 at the DEO, I think that would have been fine. What else was there? I think the retcon was interesting. I don't think the retcon was necessarily needed. I'm talking about the retcon of Legends Season 1, the episode Star City 2049, where it turns out they actually ended up on Earth 16 instead of just in the future. I feel like that was not a necessary retcon. I know a lot of people made it seem like it was a necessary retcon, but one of the things that was established as one of the rules of time travel for this universe is that the timeline is malleable. The timeline, and like anything can change. And what you do in the past will impact the future. And what happens all over the timeline will impact all over the timeline. And that's an important distinction to make, and why it's important is that, and even in this episode they do that. It's for a quick throwaway gag, but when they go to get Ray and Sarah, they're at a trivia night in a bar, and they ask the questions like, what was Janis Joplin's last song? And the answer wasn't the real answer, which is like Mercedes, I think it was. Mercedes-Benz, I think was the name of the song. But no, that wasn't the name of the song. It was Little Robot Man. And then Ray's like, oh, when I stole her hair, she saw me and she said Little Robot Man. So it's like, so he changed the timeline. An entire season of Legends was about them changing the timeline. Flashpoint weighed very heavily on season 3 of The Flash, and it also weighed very heavily on Invasion. And that was about changing the timeline. And I think that, like, quite, my issue with that is, it wasn't a necessary retcon to say, oh, we went to an alternate Earth. It's like, the timeline changes, things happen, things change, and now Oliver dies in Crisis instead of, going to, there. And it's like, he didn't have a daughter there, and, Connor Hawke is there, but, like, the universe changed because situations happened in the present, and that changed, too. And it creates a ripple effect. The retcon was interesting, though. It does allow them to bring back this version of Oliver from that one episode. Which is interesting because when we get to the climax of the episode, I think this is the most we've seen of the Monitor, kind of like, doing what he's doing in this episode. He's a pragmatist. He's kind of like, we gotta, okay, we tried to save everyone, didn't work, everyone get out. And Oliver tranks the Monitor somehow with one of his arrows, which is what these crossovers are good for, is creating random arrows that are, one-time use, like the, what's it called, the Book of Destiny arrow, the Kryptonite arrow, and now the Monitor, disabling arrow. But it's interesting. It's interesting to see how that plays out. So yeah. Very interesting first episode, and then on top of it, to capstone it, they kill off Oliver here. And I read an article where they talked to Mark Guggenheim, and I forgot his name, but the showrunner from Legends of Tomorrow. They talked to them, and they were like, well, why did you make the decision to kill off Oliver in part 1? And it's like, we've beat over the head the fact that Oliver's going to die. And we know that Oliver's going to die, so how do we play with that expectation a little bit? And it's like, we can't hold it off till hour 5, because then no one's going to care. Like, everyone's going to know it's coming. So if we move it up and do it in hour 1, it's going to still be a shock to people. So it's interesting. They may bring that other Oliver back. But who knows? So we'll wrap up for today. Tomorrow we'll be back with part 2. After part 2 airs tonight. And we'll talk about the Black Lightning episode, Earth Crisis, which will be happening at 9 o'clock tonight as well. So until then, have a great rest of your day. 30-Minute Reviews is a production of Multiple World Productions, available wherever you listen to podcasts. 30-Minute Reviews is hosted and produced by Adam Taylor. The opening theme is Be Epical by Carlos Estella, and the closing theme is Future Bass Uplifting by Alex Cerveza. You can follow Adam on Twitter at AdamTaylor792, as well as this podcast at 30-Minute Review.